They laughed when I reached for the last roll. Save some for the people who actually work, my cousin sneered. The table roared with laughter. I smiled, barely, and sipped my water instead. I had come to this dinner hoping, just maybe, to be seen as more than a burden. But I should have known better. I'm Alina Hayes, 34, quiet, thoughtful. The one in the family who never lived up to her potential, as Dad likes to say. But what they didn't know, what they still don't know, is that I run a company their entire lives unknowingly depend on. And that night, that dinner, it flipped everything upside down, because halfway through dessert, my father's boss walked in with a bottle of wine, looked straight at me, and said, "Ma'am, but let me take you back, because to understand the weight of that word, you need to hear everything that came before it. My family is filled with big personalities. Lawyers, engineers, business owners. At reunions, success isn't just admired, it's measured, and I was always the anomaly. The one who dropped out of med school. The one who wasted time chasing startups that failed. You need structure, my mom would say with a sigh. Dad was harsher. Dreamers don't pay bills. Every job I took while building my dream was just more proof to them that I was spiraling. Secretary, assistant, barista. Each one fueled their whispers. But they didn't see the late nights. The endless code. The venture meetings. They didn't see the sleepless years I spent turning an idea into a reality, because I learned early, some victories are better kept quiet, until they can't be ignored. And on that dinner night, I had no intention of revealing anything. I just wanted to survive another family gathering without being dissected. But fate had a different plan. IT started with a single line of code. Back when I was working as an IT assistant at a law firm, I noticed something about their case analysis system. It was inefficient. I created a script that sped up one of their core processes. When the senior partner saw it, he joked, "Too bad you can't sell this." I smiled and thought, why can't I? That was the seed of what would become Lucent Mind Analytics, an AI-driven compliance and risk assessment platform now used by over 400 firms globally, including the one where my dad worked. I built it in silence, layer by layer, taking freelance gigs to fund it. And when the contracts started coming in, I didn't tell a soul. Why? Because I wanted to succeed without their validation. I didn't need applause, I needed freedom. But keeping it quiet came at a cost. Especially during family dinners where I sat at the kids' table, well into my 30s. Still, I kept smiling. Until the night things exploded. It was my mother's birthday. A big, formal dinner at my parents' home. Catered, candlelight. My dad had even invited a few people from his office. "Wear something nice," Mom said on the phone. "Not your tech nerd clothes." I bit my tongue. I wore a navy blue silk dress. Clean, simple, understated. When I walked in, my younger brother raised an eyebrow and said, "Trying something new?" My cousin leaned over. "You look like you're about to pitch another app that goes nowhere." I laughed politely. It wasn't worth the energy. What was worth it? The text I got halfway through dinner from my assistant. "FYI, Connolly and Pierce signed the full 5-year contract. $3.2 million. Congrats, boss." Connolly and Pierce. Dad's firm. He had no idea he was now a client of the nothing daughter he'd written off, and when I looked across the table and saw him bragging about the new software some tech company had installed to streamline their firm, my heart pounded. He was praising my creation, without knowing it was mine, and that's when I heard the doorbell ring. I wasn't expecting him. Neither was Dadmr. Kavanaugh, CEO of Connolly and Pierce. Elegant, respected, ruthless in the courtroom. Dad nearly choked on his wine. "Sir, what a surprise." "I was in the area," Kavanaugh said. "Heard there was cake." Then his eyes scanned the room and landed on me. He smiled, walked over, extended his hand. "Ma'am," he said warmly, "it's an honor." Silence. Chairs creaked. Forks paused mid-air. My uncle blinked. My mom looked confused. And Dad? Dad looked like someone had unplugged him. I rose slowly, shook his hand. "Thank you," I said, keeping my voice steady, but inside, I was shaking, because I knew what was coming next. Kavanaugh turned to Dad. "You didn't tell me your daughter was the Alina Hayes." I didn't plan for it to come out like this, but there it was, hanging in the air. My full name. My identity. Dad stammered. I wasn't aware," Kavanaugh chuckled. "She's a genius. Lucent Mind transformed our entire case pipeline. Honestly, I thought she'd be a gray-haired MIT veteran, not your daughter." My brother leaned forward. "Wait, you built Lucent Mind?" I nodded. My cousin blinked. "The one Forbes wrote about last month?" "Yep. You're that Alina Hayes?" "Apparently, yes." I sat back down and sipped my wine, calm on the outside. But inside, a dam had burst. Years of judgment, doubt, dismissal, all collapsing in real time. My family didn't know what to say. But Kavanaugh wasn't done. Actually, he continued, we've been discussing an advisory board role. Strategic input, biannual meetings, equity bonuses. He turned to me. I was going to email next week, but since I'm here, would you consider it? You could have heard a pin drop. I smiled. I'd be honored. Dad stared at his plate. My mother opened her mouth, then closed it. My brother looked like he'd seen a ghost. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't the joke at the table, but this wasn't revenge. It wasn't about showing off. It was freedom. Still, the night wasn't over. Not even close. Because Kavanaugh had one more surprise. And when he said it, my dad stood up and walked out of the room. Kavanaugh looked puzzled as Dad excused himself and left the dining room, and my mother stood halfway, unsure whether to follow or stay. Is he all right? Kavanaugh asked. I shrugged, keeping my tone light. Maybe the roast hit him a little too hard. The table laughed nervously, but inside, I knew exactly what that walkout meant. He wasn't sick. He was humiliated. All those years of being told I was wasting my time, that tech was a hobby and not a life, and now, in front of everyone he respected, he had to face the truth. I wasn't just successful. I was a name. A name his boss admired, and in that moment, I didn't feel smug. I felt sad. It took a stranger's praise for my family to even see me, but the evening wasn't finished, not by a long shot. After Dad disappeared, the energy shifted. My brother, who had once told me I'd never make it in the real world, leaned in with a stunned grin. Alina, you really built that platform? Yep. From my apartment, using borrowed gear. He blinked. That's insane. Like, we thought you were just unemployed. I smiled. I know. My uncle, a financial consultant, chimed in. I've seen Lucent Mind reports in court cases. Didn't realize it was yours. We assumed it came out of Silicon Valley. Nope. Just me. A lot of takeout and sleepless nights. Even my mom tried to soften. Well, you always were clever with computers. I remember when you fixed the family printer in 5th grade. I nodded gently, but I didn't let her off the hook that easily, because for years, that same cleverness was met with disapproval. I wasn't practical. I wasn't stable, and suddenly, I was the pride of the table. Funny how quickly respect arrives. Once it's socially acceptable. I found Dad standing in the backyard, hands clenched around a glass. He didn't look up when I stepped outside. You embarrassed me, he muttered. I blinked. I embarrassed you? By succeeding? He turned, face flushed. You let me believe you were struggling. You let us all think you'd failed. I didn't let you, I said quietly. You assumed. You never asked. Silence, only the rustle of trees. I didn't want to compete with your image of success. I wanted to build mine, in peace. He finally looked at me. Your company, is it really that big? It's bigger than you think. And it's growing. His mouth twitched. Not pride. Not awe. Just conflict, because his version of success required a specific path. And I had rewritten the entire map. He didn't know whether to be impressed or ashamed that I'd done it without him. And what he said next told me everything. You could have asked for help, he said. I almost laughed. Help? I repeated. You told me I was wasting my life. You warned me not to dream too big. How would that help have worked? I just didn't want you to fall, he said quietly. But I did, I replied. Again and again. And I got up every time. That's why I built something that matters. He looked tired. Old, in a way I'd never seen, not because of age, but because the illusion of control had cracked. His daughter, the one he dismissed, had become a force he couldn't define. I wanted to hold him, to tell him it was okay, but I also wanted him to feel what I had felt for years, the ache of being unseen. And as I turned to walk back inside, he said the one word he hadn't said in a decade. Alina. Just my name. But for once, it carried weight. The rest of the evening blurred, polite chatter, compliments. Someone took a selfie with me. It was surreal. I left before the dishes were done. I pulled into my driveway, my phone buzzed. Unknown numbered, I answered out of habit. Miss Hayes? Yes? This is Mary from Lockridge Capital. We've been following Lucent Mind for over a year. We're prepared to offer a funding round, Series C, up to $75 million. My heart stopped. I pulled the car over and listened, barely breathing. The timing was uncanny, but what stunned me wasn't the numbered it was the fact that my silence, the choice to build without applause, had somehow become louder than any shout, and for the first time, I allowed myself to exhale. I wasn't hiding anymore. The world didn't change overnight, but mine did. In the days after that dinner, something subtle shifted, like a fog finally lifting. For years I'd been building in the dark, working in silence while my family treated me like a cautionary tale. Now, every message I opened seemed to say the same thing. We didn't know it. I began receiving emails from cousins I hadn't heard from in years. Wow, Alina, saw your name on Bloomberg. That's crazy. Even people from high school messaged me, didn't know you were doing big things. Congrats. I didn't respond to most of them, not because I was bitter, but because they were speaking to the version of me they thought they knew, the version they dismissed. And I wasn't interested in proving anything to those who had only learned to respect me after a headline. What did matter was how I felt inside. For the first time, I didn't feel like I had to justify my choices. I didn't need to hide the long nights, the failures, the grind. That Lucent Mind had gone from a late-night dream to a Series C-funded powerhouse. And yet, my greatest satisfaction didn't come from the investors or the awards. It came from something far more personal, the quiet realization that I had never needed permission to be who I was becoming. A month after the dinner, my mother called. "We're doing Thanksgiving here," she said. "Everyone's coming. You'll be there, right?" It wasn't a question. I hesitated. Going back to that house, sitting at that same table, meant reopening a room of old wounds, but I agreed, because something inside me said it was time to face it. Not for them. For me. When I arrived, I wore a simple black sweater and slacks. No flash, no labels, and this time, no one commented on my clothes. My brother offered to pour me wine. My cousin pulled out a chair. I watched as my father emerged from the kitchen, holding the turkey platter like he always did. He paused when he saw me. "Glad you came," he said. I nodded. "Thanks for having me." Simple words. But they felt different this time. When we sat down to eat, nobody asked what I did for work. They all already knew. Instead, they asked what I was working on next. For once, the table didn't feel like a firing squad. It felt like a circle, maybe not entirely healed, but no longer hostile. And when the conversation turned to tech and I was the one they listened to. 2 weeks later, I got a handwritten note in the mail from my father. "Dear Alina, I won't pretend to understand everything you've built, or how you did it, but I do know this. I was wrong to judge you by your silence. I see now that your strength was never in shouting, it was in doing. I hope you'll let me keep learning who you really are." He read it 3 times, not because I needed the apology, but because it showed growth. That he hadn't just seen me win. He'd seen himself change, and that, more than any title or valuation, felt like a triumph, because my father had finally met the woman I had become, not the daughter he tried to mold. Still, healing takes time. We began meeting for coffee. Short chats, small bridges, and every time, he asked more questions. Not to challenge, but to understand, and that made all the difference. What most people don't see about success is what happens behind closed doors, the investors who ghost you, the deadlines that crush you, the days when nothing works and everything feels like a mistake. There were nights I sobbed into a pillow, wondering if I had made the worst decision of my life. There were weeks I couldn't pay rent, eating ramen while rewriting my pitch deck for the 10th time. There were meetings where I was spoken over, dismissed, even mocked, until I opened the demo and made jaws drop. But I kept going, not because I was fearless, but because I knew what it was like to give up on myself, and I wasn't going back there. People now call me a visionary. Funny, for years they called me unstable. Turns out the line between failure and genius is just a little patience. Months passed. Lucent Mind expanded to Europe. We landed government contracts. We hired our 100th employee, and one day, as I walked into a conference in DC, a young woman ran up to me. "Excuse me, are you Alina Hayes?" "Yes," I said, smiling. She shook my hand with both of hers. "I just wanted to say, your story is why I didn't quit. I read everything about you." I blinked, stunned. "You remind me it's okay to build slow, quiet, purposefully." I nodded. "It is. And don't let anyone shame you for it." "Thank you, ma'am." There it was again. Ma'am, but this time, it wasn't formality. It was reverence. I carried that moment with me, because for every person who tried to crush my fire, there were others waiting to see it light the way. Last month, I was invited to speak at a legal tech summit that IT was hosted by Connolly and Pierce, my dad's firm. I stood backstage in a navy blue suit, waiting to be introduced. My father sat in the front row. Beside him, his boss, F. Kavanaugh, who now served as one of my board advisors. When they introduced me, the crowd rose in applause. I walked out, took the mic, and scanned the room, and for a second, just a breath, I saw my younger self sitting in the corner at family dinners, hearing, "You'll never be anything." And I smiled, because I had become everything they said I couldn't, and the people who once called me nothing, now called me ma'am. After the summit, I didn't celebrate with champagne or parties. I went home, heels off, hair tied back. I reheated leftovers and sat on my living room floor, eating with chopsticks, because I still hadn't unpacked my silverware from the last move, because even though the world now saw me as a powerhouse CEO, I still lived like that girl in a studio apartment, with sticky notes on the walls and a fire in her chest. That night, I scrolled through the flood of LinkedIn messages. "Your story inspired me. How did you stay patient for so long? How did you know you'd make it?" The truth, I didn't. I never knew if I'd make it. But I knew I couldn't live with myself if I didn't try, and that's the part they don't write about, the trying, the failing, the stubborn believing that IT wasn't all applause. Some family members never reached out, not a message. Not a wow. I saw the news. They couldn't reconcile who I had become with who they had always believed I was. IT threatened their worldview too much. One cousin, who used to openly mock my fake business, blocked me on social media after I was interviewed by Forbes. Another relative once told my mother, "It's probably some gimmick that'll fade." I learned something valuable: a success doesn't heal every relationship, and it shouldn't have to, because validation from those who once dismissed you isn't a requirement for peace. Sometimes, the real power is in letting go of the people who only knew how to love you when you were small. 6 months later, I got a call from my dad. "Your grandmother's birthday is coming up," he said. "Everyone's going to be there. Would you come?" I paused. He didn't say it, but I knew what he meant. Would I come? Not as a spectacle, not as the CEO, but just as Alina. I said yes. When I arrived, my grandmother squeezed me like always, and the living room was filled with old photos, familiar smells, and voices I'd memorized since childhood. But this time, no one made jokes at my expense. No one raised eyebrows when I mentioned a project. My cousin, the one who used to call me a glorified coder, now asked for tips on launching his own platform. My aunt, who once called me unrealistic, now asked if her daughter could intern at Lucent Mind. IT was full circle, but not in a triumphant way, in a human way. That we all grow. Some of us just grow in silence. Lucent Mind is no longer just a platform, it's a movement. We now offer scholarships for underrepresented tech students. We mentor high school girls in low-income areas, because I know what it feels like to be underestimated, and I want the next girl who's mocked for thinking too big to feel seen. Sometimes I walk into a school gym to speak, and I see her in the back, hood up, notebook out, afraid to raise her hand. I always call on her, because I was her, and if I have one purpose in this world beyond what I've built, it's to remind the quiet ones they're not invisible. IT came quietly, in the form of a message, an email. Just a few lines. "Alina, I watched the interview you did last week, the one where you talked about resilience. I didn't say it enough when you were younger, but I see now how much strength you had. I'm sorry for not recognizing it then. Love." Momi stared at it for a long time, not because I was waiting for an apology, but because I never expected one. Growing up, love in our house came in rules, in warnings, in restraint. Not softness, but this message cracked something open, and maybe that was enough. Maybe some bridges don't need to be rebuilt perfectly, just honestly. I replied simply, "Thank you. I see you now too." They don't tell you that success comes in waves. There are peaks, headlines, awards, applause, but there are valleys too. A quarter later, one of our biggest clients downsized, revenue dipped. Analysts panicked, and for a week, my face was on tech blogs, not as a visionary CEO, but as a leader under pressure. I stayed calm in public. But behind the scenes, I questioned everything. Was this my fault? Had I grown too fast? Did I deserve to lead? Then I remembered that girl, sitting in her tiny kitchen, building software on a cracked laptop. She didn't wait for permission, she didn't run from pressure, she built an ITSO. I got up, restructured our strategy, held a team meeting, and looked my employees in the eye. I told them the truth. I told them we'd adapt, and we did, not because of luck, but because resilience had become our backbone, just like it had always been mine years ago. I would have done anything to be accepted at my family's table. Now, I host my own. Every quarter, I invite a group of young women founders to dinner. No pitch decks. No suits. Just conversation. We talk about burnouts, imposter syndrome, family pressure. We laugh. We cry. We leave stronger. And sometimes, as I look around the room, I think if only someone had created a space like this when I was starting out. Then I smile. Because now, I get to be that someone. Lucent Mind continues to grow, but my heart now stretches beyond code and data. I've begun working on a book, a memoir, they say, but to me, it's a letter. To every girl told she's too quiet, too weird, too ambitious. I want her to know her voice matters, even if she whispers it at first, even if no one claps when she starts, because the world doesn't need more noise. IT needs more realness, and that's something I never planned to silence again. Years later, I attended a private industry gala. The room was filled with billionaires, former senators, CEOs. As I stepped off stage after speaking, a woman in her 70s approached, elegant, sharp, eyes full of fire. She extended her hand and said, "Ma'am, your words reminded me of my younger self. Thank you for not waiting to be invited. Thank you for just owning it." I laughed, blinking back tears. "Thank you for calling me ma'am like that," I said. That word, it used to hurt. It used to come with mockery. She grinned then. "I hope it lands with pride now. Because it suits you." And for the first time, I fully believed it. A few months after the gala, I found myself in a boardroom surrounded by legacy investors, men who had been moving money before I was even born. They weren't rude, but their questions had a sharp edge. Do you think your model is sustainable? What if your platform gets overshadowed by a competitor? Are you personally equipped to lead this into the next phase? I didn't flinch, because I'd faced tougher rooms, ones with laughter, not questions, ones with family who didn't believe in me at all. I answered them clearly. I spoke of data, of strategy, of human-centered design, but most of all, I spoke with authority born not of schooling or legacy, but of lived experience. And when the meeting ended, one of the oldest men in the room approached me quietly. You're not just another tech founder, he said. You're a force. I underestimated you. I won't make that mistake again. That's when I knew the world was catching up to the truth I'd carried alone for years. It took time, but my relationship with my father evolved, not into perfection, but into honesty. One evening, he invited me over just to talk. No celebration. No hidden agenda. Just two people learning how to see each other again. He asked about my early struggles. What kept you going? He said, genuinely curious, I think. I replied, it was knowing that one day, I'd get to create space for others who were told they were too small. He nodded slowly. I used to think success only looked one way. Your way scared me. Because I didn't understand it. I know, I said. And I forgive you. And in that moment, it wasn't about business or pride or who was right. It was about two people, rebuilding a language they'd never been taught to speak. Vulnerability. A local university reached out to me one spring. They asked if I would give the commencement speech to their tech graduates. I stood at the podium in front of thousands, students in gowns, parents in tears, professors beaming, and I said this: you will be underestimated, you will be misunderstood, and some of the people who love you the most will not know how to support your dreams. Build anyway, grow anyway, dream anyway, because one day, someone will look at you, not with doubt, but with awe, and they will say, we had no idea, and you'll smile, not because you needed their permission, but because you finally gave it to yourself. Afterward, one girl hugged me so tightly. I thought my ribs might crack. You said exactly what I needed to hear, she whispered. I smiled. Because I had once needed to hear it too. In my office, there's a photo wall, not of celebrities, not of awards, but of moments. The day I signed my first client. A post-it note with the words, don't quit today. A blurry photo of me holding a coffee at 3 a.m., dark circles under my eyes. It's a gallery of grit, because I never want to forget how I got here. Visitors always comment on the wall, why not hang your Forbes feature? Where's the big, glossy frame? I just smile, because that wall, it's not about the world seeing my success, it's about me remembering my fight. It used to sting, that word, ma'am, said with sarcasm, said with superiority, but now, I've reclaimed it. When my employees call me ma'am, I hear respect. When clients say it, I hear trust. When a young woman says it, I hear hope. Ma'am is no longer a reminder of how small they once made me feel. It's a title I earned in silence, through tears, tenacity, and truth. And if someone says it with that old edge, I just smile, because they still don't get it, but I do, and that's enough. I think often about the girl I used to be, the one sitting in the corner at family dinners, tracing the edges of her plate, too afraid to speak up, the one who built in silence because her voice felt too small, the one who wore self-doubt like armor, hoping one day someone would see her worth. I want to find her again, not to change her, but to thank her, because she never gave up. She kept writing code even when no one cared. She kept trying, even when she was laughed at. She kept dreaming, even when the world told her to shrink, and now, she's the reason I stand here. Whole. Powerful. Unapologetic. Every girl like her reading this, know this: your path doesn't need to be loud to be real. You don't need a cheerleader to be worthy. You just need one thing: belief. Even a flicker is enough to light an empire. It was a rainy Sunday when someone buzzed at my gate. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened the door, it was my old computer science professor, the one who once told me, you're smart, Alina, but you lack follow-through. He held an umbrella and a familiar sheepish grin. I saw your keynote, he said. I owe you an apology. I smiled, stepping aside. Come in. We sat by the fireplace. He looked around at the books, the awards, the quiet comfort. You always had it, he said softly. I just didn't know how to see it. Most people didn't, I replied, but I'm glad I saw it in myself. That moment wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about rubbing success in anyone's face. It was about witnessing growth, his, and mine, and letting go of what no longer needed to be carried. A week after that visit from my professor, I received an email. It wasn't from a journalist or investor. It was from a teenager. Hi Ms. Hayes. My name is Malia. I'm 17. I watched a clip of your speech online. I don't usually write to people like this, but I wanted to say thank you. Everyone in my life keeps telling me to be realistic. But then I saw you. You weren't loud. You weren't flashy. but you were everything I want to be: smart, kind, brave. So, thank you for showing me that quiet girls can win too. I sat back in my chair and exhaled. This was the real reward, not the bank accounts, not the business headlines, but the fact that my journey had become a torch in someone else's dark eye. Replied, not with advice, but with truth. Dear Malia, you already are brave. The fact that you reached out proves that. Keep going, even when no one claps. Especially then, the world doesn't need another version of someone else. It needs your version of you. You're not behind. You're just beginning. Alina, family used to be something I shrank inside, a room of people who told me who I wasn't, but now? Family looks different. It's the team that stayed with me when times got tough. It's the women I mentor who share their wins like confetti. It's the interns who light up when I call them leaders. It's chosen. It's earned. It's honest. I still go to the occasional holiday dinner. My father and I talk carefully, but kindly. My mother makes space now, not perfectly, but intentionally. Some wounds still ache, but they're not infected anymore. They're just reminders of how far I've come, not away from them, but into myself. Not long ago, a young woman opened a co-working space just a few blocks from my office. I visited out of curiosity. She introduced herself with a nervous smile. I'm Aria, she said. This is my first venture. I looked around. The space was humble: white boards, beanbags, second-hand furniture, but the energy? It was electric. I stayed an hour longer than planned, and as I left, I wrote her a check. Not for equity, not for attention, just as a gesture. On the memo line, I wrote, for the next woman who was told she's dreaming too big. She messaged me later in tears, but I didn't respond with congratulations. I responded with keep building. You haven't even started yet. Legacy is a funny thing that we think it's what we leave behind, but it's also what we live in the small, quiet moments. Legacy is the girl who wrote me at 17. It's the way my team jokes with me in meetings now. It's the high school that named their tech lab after me without even telling me first. But it's the quiet shift in how people say my name, no longer laced with disbelief, but with something close to reverence, not for the empire I built, but for the way I built it, stone by stone, scar by scar, without needing to shout. Years ago, I wrote a letter I never sent. It was to my family. It said, I'm not sorry for who I am. I won't apologize for wanting more than comfort. I'm not broken because I don't live the life you imagined for me, and I'm not asking for permission to be proud of myself anymore. I kept it in a drawer, but now, I don't need it, because I no longer live for their understanding. I live for truth, for creation, for legacy, for every woman who was once just like me. Now, when I walk into a room and someone says, that's Alina Hayes, they don't follow it with a question mark, they follow it with curiosity, respect, admiration. They don't ask, isn't she that weird tech girl? They say, she's the one who built Lucent Mind. She's the one who didn't give up. She's the one who changed the way the legal world works. But the title that matters most to me, not CEO, not founder, not visionary. It's the one a quiet girl whispered to me once, with hope in her eyes, you're just like me. This time, I was the one setting the table. The invitations were handwritten. The seating was intentional. No hierarchy. No expectations. Just stories, laughter, and connection. It was a mix of people, some who once underestimated me, and others who had believed in me before I even believed in myself. Old friends, new colleagues, and my parents, even my brother, who once rolled his eyes every time I mentioned a startup. Halfway through the meal, he raised a toast to Alina, he said, lifting his glass, for showing us what happens when you bet on yourself. I didn't cry, but something in me softened, because for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I was sitting at their table, they were sitting at mine. I was nominated for an award, Entrepreneur of the Year. At first, I hesitated to accept a not out of modesty, but because I didn't build Lucent Mind for awards, but something in me whispered, accept it. Not for you now, for the girl who started all this with nothing but a borrowed laptop and a head full of dreams. So, I went black jumpsuit, hair pulled back, no flash, just purpose. When they called my name, I walked on stage to thunderous applause, and in my acceptance speech, I said, this award doesn't belong to the most successful version of me. It belongs to every version, the broke one, the tired one, the doubted one, the one who once sat at family dinner being told she was nothing. I kept building anyway. The standing ovation wasn't for the trophy. It was for the truth. Months later, a journalist asked me during a live interview, what would you say to the people who didn't believe in you? I paused. The old me would have launched into receipts, revenge, a list of names, but I smiled and simply said, thank you. The interviewer blinked. You're thanking them? Yes, I replied, because they helped me build my resilience there. Silence taught me how to listen to myself. Their rejection gave me room to write my own rules. The clip went viral and millions watched, but what mattered most was the message. You don't need validation to matter. You don't need permission to rise. You just need to stay standing long enough for the truth to surface. Everything I do now circles back to one question: would this have helped younger me? Every time I invest in a startup led by a woman of color, every time I create a job role for someone overlooked by the system, every time I sit down to mentor a founder who's one failure away from quitting, I ask myself, would this have saved her even 1 ounce of pain? Because while I can't rewrite my past, I can rewrite the path for the ones behind me. If that's not charity, if that's legacy. I wrote one last letter, but this time, it wasn't to my family. It wasn't to the press. It wasn't to the critics. That it was to me. Dear Alina. You did it. You built something no one believed in but you. You stood tall when no one clapped. You learned how to hold your own heart when no one else knew how, and now? Now you are the voice that others cling to in the dark. You are the proof, not just that it's possible, but that it's worth it. Thank you for not quitting. Love, your future self. I folded it up and taped it to the inside of my office door so I can read it every time I step out into the world. A few weeks after I taped that final letter to my door, I found myself in the elevator of a downtown building, headed to a panel discussion. Just before the doors closed, a younger woman slipped in. She looked flustered, papers nearly spilling from her bag. She glanced at me and did a double take. You're Alina Hayes, right? She asked. I nodded. She blinked twice, then whispered, I didn't think you'd take the elevator. I smiled. I built it too, I replied. She laughed softly, but then, her voice turned serious. Can I just say, you make me believe I can keep going. That moment wasn't flashy. There were no cameras, no stages, no audience, just two women in an elevator, one who had made it, and one who just needed a glimpse of what was possible. And in that quiet exchange, I was reminded, the real power isn't in being seen by the world, that it's in being seen by the one who needed hope today. The biggest moments in life, I've learned, are often preceded by silence, not the silence of emptiness, but the silence of becoming. The day before we closed our Series D funding, I sat alone in my office, lights low, calendar cleared, phone on silent. I opened my journal. No headlines, no numbers, just feelings. I am proud of who I've become. I am enough, even when it's quiet. Even if this all disappeared tomorrow, I would still be worthy. That last line made me pause, because it was true. I no longer tied my value to valuation. My wasn't in what I produced, it was in who I had become to get here. And when the applause came the next day, it felt earned, but not needed. That's growth. It was at a small neighborhood event, local leaders, school principals, city planners. My father had recently become more active in community projects. I wasn't supposed to speak, just attend, but midway through the event, the host invited my dad up to say a few words. He walked up, holding a folded paper and shaking hands. Then he cleared his throat. I want to introduce someone who's taught me more than I ever taught her. He looked right at me, my daughter, Alina Hayes. There was a long pause, then he added, smartest person I know. Bravest, too. She didn't just build a company, she rebuilt me. I stood slowly, unsure whether to cry or smile. I did both. Sometimes, recognition doesn't come when you need it most. It comes when you've stopped waiting for it, and that's what makes it real. I started visiting schools once a month. No press, no formal talks, just honest Q&A sessions. One visit, a little girl raised her hand and asked, are you famous? I laughed and shook my head. No, I'm just someone who didn't quit. She thought for a second, then nodded. So you're like a fighter. I smiled. Exactly. The teachers always asked why I made time for these visits. I told them, because when I was that age, no one like me ever walked through the classroom door. One who had been laughed at by their own family, and one who was called nothing and still rose anyway. If I could be that person for even one student, the rest of my legacy would take care of itself. I was invited to a government tech roundtable, private, invitation only. Cabinet advisors, defense officials, agency heads, all of them with long titles and longer resumes. I walked in quietly, wearing my usual blazer and low heels. The room was already buzzing with introductions. Some paused when they saw me. They knew my face, my work, my name. But when the moderator announced, please welcome Ms. Alina Hayes, something happened I didn't expect. They stood, not out of politeness, but respect. The same title, ma'am, that once came laced with sarcasm, was now said with deference, earned, not demanded. And as I took my seat at the head of the table, I thought, this was never about proving them wrong. It was about proving me right. It was a Tuesday, and no emergencies, no deadlines, no launch, just a calendar. So quiet it felt foreign. I made tea, took a walk, watched the sun climb through my window without once glancing at my inbox. I read a book. One I would have devoured years ago if I hadn't been too busy trying to be somebody. And in that stillness, I realized rest is part of the revolution, too, especially for women like me, who were taught that worth is tied to output. That day, I didn't build, I didn't pitch, I didn't climb, I just existed, and it was enough. I used to whisper to my reflection, don't let them be right. It was my armor, my edge. But now, I look into the mirror and say something different. You did it. And you did it without becoming anyone else. Because success isn't just reaching the top. It's reaching it intact, with your values, your voice, your softness still alive inside you. I didn't lose myself to win, I brought all of myself, and that's what made the win real. Now, the mirror doesn't show a girl trying to become the it shows a woman who already is the no one talks about the different kind of legacy, the one that lives in bedtime stories and Sunday pancakes. Years later, my son, just 5 years old, asked me what I did at work. Before I could answer, he said, "Are you the boss who helps people?" I laughed and nodded. "Yes, I try to be." He thought for a moment, then said, "When I grow up, I want to build stuff too. And help people. Like you." It hit me then, all the boardrooms, the articles, the interviews, they were chapters, but this was the sequel I never saw coming. Not just legacy in numbers, but legacy in love. It came on a rainy afternoon. I was sitting at my desk, catching up on mentoring applications. My assistant popped her head in. "There's someone on the line," she said. "Says it's urgent. From your hometown." My heart sank a little. Hometown calls had old weight. I picked up. The voice on the other end was shaky. "Alina, it's Ms. Dorsey. My high school English teacher, the one who once let me hide in her classroom during lunch when I didn't feel like facing the cafeteria, the one who told me I was meant for more, even when my grades didn't show it." She was retiring, and the school board wanted to name the new STEM building after me. "Not because you're rich," she said, chuckling, "but because you're real. The kids here, they believe in you." I leaned back in my chair, overwhelmed. I had left that town thinking I'd never be remembered. Now, they were building walls with my name on them, but more than that, they were building hope. At a conference in San Francisco, a man approached me, well-dressed. "Familiar eyes, Alina?" he asked cautiously. "It's Jacob. From university. We were in CS 404 together." I remembered him, the guy who used to joke that I was wasting a seat someone else could have used, the one who said, "You're too emotional to survive tech." He smiled nervously. "I just wanted to say I was wrong about you. I was, well, kind of a jerk back then." I nodded. "Yeah, you were." He blinked, caught off guard, but I wasn't angry. "Just honest." "I appreciate you saying that," I added. "But I didn't build all this to prove you wrong. I built it to prove myself right." He looked down. "I get that. And I'm sorry." We shook hands, and I walked away lighter, because closure doesn't always need a bow. Sometimes, it's just an acknowledgement, and the peace of not needing it anymore. For a long time, my name felt heavy, too many syllables. Too unusual, too, not like. There's in rooms full of polished, practice names. Mine stood out, and not in the way I wanted. But now, they don't stumble when they say it, they don't shorten it, they don't ask, "Do you go by something else?" They say it with certainty. Helena Hayes. A name not just known, but respected, because it stands for more than a company. IT stands for the girl who didn't quit when no one clapped. IT stands for the woman who refused to shrink. Not every victory comes with noise, some come quietly, like the day I got home after speaking at the UN Summit on Innovation. There were no streamers, no flowers, no social post waiting to go live, just me, my slippers, my sleeping son. I sat on the couch, exhausted, and for the first time in a long time, truly content, because the most powerful applause isn't from the crowd, that it's from within. It's the silence after the storm, the moment when you realize you didn't just survive, you soared, and now, you can rest. The request came in from a major global publication. They wanted to feature women who redefined power. Naturally, I was honored, but I hesitated. I'd done interviews, I'd done panels, speeches, podcasts, even the occasional documentary voiceover, but this time, it wasn't about my business. It was about me. Off the record, the journalist said as we prepped, "Do you ever feel like you've proven them wrong?" I looked at her, and for the first time, I answered differently. "I didn't build this to prove anyone wrong," I said. "I built it because I knew I was right, even when no one else saw it." She nodded slowly, eyes glinting. "You don't sound angry." "I'm not," I smiled. "I'm free." And just like that, I realized this wasn't a spotlight moment. It was a mirror, a reflection of how far I'd come, not just in status, but in spirit. I was keynote speaker at a global Women in Leadership Summit, hundreds of attendees, thousands, tuning in online. The moment felt big, but I wasn't nervous, because this time, I wasn't there to impress, I was there to tell the truth. I told them about the family dinners where I was laughed at, the cold boardrooms, the empty bank accounts, the tears no one saw. I told them about the that stung before it ever empowered, about the voice that shook before it grew strong. Then I said, there will be people who call you impossible, unrealistic, unqualified. Let them talk, because while they're busy underestimating you, you'll be busy building something they'll never forget. When I walked off stage, the standing ovation didn't feel like applause. It felt like a collective yes, from every woman who had ever been told she was too little, too late, or too loud. A few months later, my family hosted another dinner. This time, It wasn't awkward, it wasn't strained, it was calm. My father asked how my new expansion in Nairobi was going. My brother asked if his daughter could shadow me for her school's entrepreneur project. My mother said, "We always knew you'd be something." I didn't flinch. I didn't scoff. I just nodded, took another bite of roasted potatoes, and smiled to myself, because I didn't need them to rewrite history, I just needed them to recognize the present, and they finally had. Years later, I had a daughter, and as I held her for the first time, I whispered something into her tiny ear: "You are already enough." Not because of what she'll achieve, not because of what the world will say, but because she exists. Because she breathes. Because she is. And I made a promise that day to never make her doubt her own fire. Never laugh when she dreams out loud. Never confuse protection with limitation. She will grow up knowing her mother built an empire, but, more importantly, that her mother never forgot where she came from. They called me a ma'am once with a smirk. A throwaway word used to remind me of where I didn't belong, but now? It's what security guards say when they open the doors. It's what government officials say when they ask for my counsel. It's what students whisper when I walk into classrooms. It's what little girls say when they look up and see someone who looks like them at the front. It's what my father calls me now, sometimes without thinking, and every time I hear it, I feel none of the sting, only strength, because the world finally sees me, but more importantly, I finally see myself. And, to the woman reading this, still waiting for your moment, don't wait for the title. Don't wait for permission. Don't wait for applause. Just build, brick by brick, word by word, day by day. One day, they'll call you ma'am, and you'll smile, because by then, you'll know you were always something, they just didn't see it yet.